Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello, and welcome to episode 83 of TheKillFile. I'm so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, if you are enjoying TheKillFile and you want a few more episodes each month, you can sign up for the Hidden Files, either over on Patreon, which I believe it has its own app, or on Spotify, if you'd like. It's just $3 a month and you will get 2 bonus episodes, and as the podcast grows and the more people that sign up, the more I will be able to add to the bonus content and add different tiers, etc. But since I am a one-man show for now, 2 episodes it is. These are going to be slightly different than our regular Monday episodes. I would say they aren't necessarily as dark, but just as twisted. We will cover things like gangsters, natural disasters, and some fascinating plane crashes and their outcomes. So, if you haven't taken a look, I would say check those out. If you're interested in hearing the first sample episode, then head to episode number 81, where I put out the first episode for everyone to hear after my subscribers heard it first, back in December. Next, if you haven't yet, check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can find our merch shop. I will be adding new gear to it soon, but we do have some seriously awesome stuff like funny t-shirts and sweatshirts and other things besides clothes. Even if it's just to browse, you should totally check it out. It's really fun. Also, on the website, you can find the Listener Files forum and share your own true crime experiences for a chance to be on a Hidden Files, where I will compile your stories for a fun bonus content episode. Finally, please take a moment just to rate, review, subscribe, or follow whichever your app asks of you for the newest episodes every Monday. And it only takes a second. It truly is the best way to help the podcast. It raises it in the lists for others to find, where we can continue to grow. Thank you guys so very much. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today is a little more of a well-known case, but it's creepy and it's unsolved, and you never know who you could reach or who might know something. Today, we are going to cover the Keddie Cabin murders. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder, molestation, pedophilia, and brutality. Here we go. Today's case is going to take us to Keddie, California in the year of 1981. Keddie, California is said to be a small, in fact, tiny town. And just to give us a sense of just how small it is, on the 2020 census, they would say that there's about 51 people living there. People who have been to visit or have lived there say that you really get a sense of a small town and that everyone knows everyone else. It seems to be the kind of place where you can escape to. It's located in the Plumas County, surrounded by forestry. People sometimes will go there for like a visit or a stay, like a holiday getaway. The area that today's killings happened were cabins, and the way that it was described reminded me of where I grew up in Colorado. It was not far from Estes Park. And on the way up the canyon, they had these types of cabins that you could like rent or stay at. And one of the rivers was along some of the cabins for fishing, exploring, or whatever. The Keddie Resort cabins were just the kind of place a mother of 5, Sue Sharp, was looking for, as she had separated from her then-husband, Jim Sharp. Sue and Jim Sharp had lived with their 5 children in North Carolina until the divorce, when Sue would pack up the children and head straight to her brother's area of Quincy, California, just 10 miles south of Keddie. Apparently, Jim Sharp was not a good guy. He was a military man, while Sue would stay home raising the children. It was alleged by one of the daughters that Jim was not only violent towards the family, but was sexually abusing his daughters before Sue left with them. According to PlumasNews.com, when Sue left Jim in 1979, she first had rented what was said to be a smaller mobile home in a place called Claremont Trailer Park, where Jim had actually come to visit the family once and never again. In November of 1979 is when Sue moved herself and her kids into a larger cabin-type home in Keddie, Cabin 28. The cabin was said to have 2 bedrooms, which of course isn't much when you have 5 children. The oldest daughter was named Sheila, the oldest son, Johnny, Tina, Rick, and then Greg was the youngest. According to Sheila, on an episode of People Magazine Investigates about this case called Cabin 28 Horror in the Woods, Sheila would describe her siblings as follows. Johnny could be somewhat of a smartass and a bit of a rascal. Rick was a bit quiet, and little Greg was considered feisty. People who knew Sue Sharp would describe her as a good lady who seemingly loved her kids and was not known to be a big partier or anything. I kept thinking as I learned this story that I wanted to know what Sue did for a living and how hard it must have been to try and support 5 kids on your own. It was stated in sources that Sue nor her kids got any kind of support from Jim, so if that tells you anything about the kind of guy he was, child molester and bum, go fuck yourself, Jim. Sue was said to receive only $250 a month from the Navy, which in today's money would be like $983, but of course, for 5 kids, that's not nearly enough. So, Sue worked part-time at the Quincy Elk Lodge as well and was using food stamps to get through. She was also enrolled in a typing class that was part of something called the California Education Training Act, and because she was enrolled in the class, she got a little bit of money from that as well as she attended Feather River College. Johnny was said to have mostly stayed in the basement, where it was said that in sources you could only get through from a separate entrance on the outside. This would leave the family upstairs, usually leaving the door unlocked so that Johnny could get what he needed from the house, most notably to use the restroom. The 3 girls in the house, including Sue, all shared one room, and the 2 little boys shared the other. As Sue and the kids were living in the cabin, they would make friends with the family next door to their own cabin, the Seabolt family. Keddie was known to be a place where not only did everyone know each other, but you seemingly looked out for one another, and a place where all of your kids could play together and be friendly. This seemed especially true for the cabins on Keddie Station Loop Road. Not only did Sue Sharp, who usually kept to herself, know the family next door, the Seabolts, but another family that was across the street was Cabin 26, where the Smart family lived. Mother Marilyn, stepfather Marty, and their children, and with them was a guest, a friend of Marty's, named John Boubidet. Marilyn and Marty were said to be in the same typing class as Sue actually, and all of the kids got along really well. Cabin 28, where Sue and her kids lived, was said to be kind of in the middle section of their block, and it was actually not far from the town hotel. During this time, Keddie, as we know, wasn't huge, so they were probably proud of the fact that they did indeed have a hotel, and the hotel had a bar and a restaurant. Keddie also had a general store, a post office, and even a house for boarders who were in the area or students who might be attending the Feather River College. A job that would have been bigger at this time would be workers of the railroad, and these workers usually either had their own homes or rented a cabin because this area was known to be more of like a summer vacation or destination type of resort. Keddie would be a nice, fresh new start for Sue and her children, or so they thought. The kids seemed to be happy enough despite the things that they had been through and were able, as mentioned before, to make friends with the neighborly kids. Johnny had met a good friend he often hung out with, a boy named Dana Wingate. Sheila, in fact, would become close with daughter Alicia from next door with the Seabolt family. And on April 11th, 1981, Sheila was invited to spend the night next door with Alicia, which she did. That same evening, it was decided that the boys would have friends to spend the night as well at Sue's home. Johnny had Dana over, and the 2 little boys had a friend named Justin Easton, who was son of Marilyn Smart and stepfather Martin Smart. Sheila would say that the evening seemed relatively normal as she hung out at the Seabolt's home. They watched TV and ended up going to bed. The next morning, Sheila got up, got her things together to head back home. The cabins were about 15 feet apart. As Sheila opened the door, she would stumble across a scene that no one should ever have to see and something that no one would ever forget. As Sheila opened the door to her cabin home, she would see carnage and blood. She would state that at the time, she couldn't tell who the bodies were, but all she could see were that people had been tied up with medical tape and electrical wire. As she took a brief moment looking around the room, she didn't see her mother, but she did see a hammer and even a bent knife. Not knowing if anyone was still inside who may have done this to her family, she dropped her belongings and went screaming back next door to the Seabolt family. The Seabolts called the police, and then their oldest son, Jamie, decided to go take a quick look as he creeped around the sides and the back of the house to look in. When he got to one of the windows, he peered inside, and he could see that the 3 youngest boys were still asleep and were thankfully alive. He immediately got the boys out of the window with him and to safety, wanting to keep them from seeing the bloody and traumatic crime scene. I was so horrified that people had been seemingly butchered inside of the home, but so grateful that the youngest of the children, Rick, Greg, and friend Justin, had been spared or left alone, or whatever the case may be. Until the sheriff's office was able to get to the scene, no one really knew who was dead inside other than a guess or two. Once the authorities arrived, they were able to tell the 3 people inside of the cabin who were murdered were Sue, at the time she was 36 years old, her oldest son Johnny, 15 years old, and his friend Dana, who was 17. When the news came to Sue's brother, so Sheila's uncle, he rushed to their home, and he got there quickly because he didn't live far. He was said to have had to look at the scene a few times to be able to even identify or tell who each person who was killed was. When the authorities started their investigation into who could have done such a horrific and brutal slaying of 2 teenagers and a mother, they started to try to piece things together as to what could have happened. They could tell by the scene that there had been a fight, and Johnny in particular had a lot of injuries to his body. They were also able to tell that not only had the victims been stabbed various times by what the Feather River Bulletin said were 2 bloody kitchen household knives, but they were also able to conclude that not just 1, but 2 different hammers had been used as well. One of the hammers was found at the scene, but the other seemed to be missing. The kitchen knives were said to be a bent steak knife and then a butcher knife as well. Special Investigator Mike Gamberg of the Plumas County Sheriff's Department, who was interviewed on the episode of People's Magazine about this case, would say that the scene was utterly shocking, and to them, it screamed of being a personal attack on the victims because of the degree of brutality and the amount of knife stabbings. Johnny would be the first victim found, as he was said to be closest to the front door. He would be found lying on his back with his hands tied up with medical tape and completely covered in blood, and sadly, his throat had been slit. Next to Johnny, they would find his friend Dana laying on his stomach, as the authorities could clearly see that his head had been bludgeoned with a blunt object. He had been left where his head was partially resting on a pillow on the floor, and his feet were tied together using electrical wire, which had also been used to tie up Johnny's feet, leaving the 2 boys connected at their ankles. Sue had been found partially covered with a blanket lying on her side. The authorities would find Sue partially naked from the waist down and sadly gagged, using her own underwear and what was said to be a bandana. And then, to keep her gagged, the killers used medical tape on her mouth. There was found on Sue an imprint of a pellet gun on the side of her head, and just like Johnny, her throat had been slit. Each of the victims clearly showed signs of being beaten with a hammer or 2 different hammers, and numerous stab wounds to each of them. The authorities believed that this attack was not carried out quickly, but instead that the killer or killers had taken their time, seeing as the victims were tied up and brutalized. They believed in order for a killer to subdue or be able to gain control over 2 healthy teenage boys, that there was most likely 2 killers, because they didn't believe that just one person would have been able to carry this out by themselves on all 3 people. This left the authorities wondering if the reason that Johnny seemingly had more injuries inflicted upon his body was there a chance that he was trying to protect his mother in some way? They were also wondering why all of the younger boys were left alive. As the authorities searched to find a motive, the only thing as far as evidence went, besides the bloodied knives and the hammer, was an unidentified fingerprint that would be found on the handrail near the rear stairs of the cabin. They would also find that the curtains were all closed and the phone had been left off the hook. Creepy. Seeing as this was pre-DNA time, evidence was collected from the scene, but there wasn't a whole lot that they could do with it. It was around this time that it was realized someone was missing. Someone who should have been there, whether dead or alive, was not. Where was Sheila's younger sister, 12-year-old Tina? They quickly realized that no one had seen or known the location or whereabouts of Tina, who would have also been in the home during the attack. Immediately, there would begin a search of missing Tina, as an APB was put out in surrounding areas of Lassen, Butte, and Sierra counties, as well as Reno, Nevada, because it's only, I guess, like 80 or 90 miles away from Quincy, which, yeah, I had to look that up on a map when I learned that, because I had no idea how far up Nevada was. Yeah, I'm dumb. Moving on. The APB put the various counties and cities on alert for missing Tina, saying that she had longer blonde hair, her body style was stated as slightly muscular as well, and having last been seen wearing a blue shirt and blue jeans. The search was on in the surrounding areas for Tina, including the roads in Keddie, the side roads up to all of the county lines, but there was no sign of Tina. The FBI would be brought in to help find her, as posters were being plastered all over the place with her picture. All the while, the town was reeling from such a horrendous, grisly scene happening in their little community. There were so many unanswered questions. A few of the theories that the authorities had circled around different people. At first, they thought it was a possibility that Sue was being attacked and maybe Johnny and Dana walked in on something and tried to defend her. Then, of course, the thought was whether or not Johnny could have been the target. However, After Tina was presumably kidnapped or abducted, the focus of the authorities' investigation circled around the possibility that Tina could have been the target, and maybe everyone else there was collateral damage. Was the point in this madness to take Tina? If so, who would do that to such a young girl? Did they know Tina? Wouldn't they have at least had to have seen her and know where she lived? Another tidbit of information that the authorities were working on was nailing down a timeline for the murders. All they knew so far was that Sheila was out of the home at the time next door, Tina had arrived home to go to bed around 9:30 p.m., and that Johnny and Dana had been seen hitchhiking back to Keddie from the area of Quincy and had last been seen between 9 and 10 p.m. As the neighbors had been questioned, the only thing that came to note was two neighbors reporting that they heard what they thought were muffled screams around 1:30 a.m., but because they didn't know where they were actually coming from, the pair went back to bed. Oh man, when I learned this, I was thinking, not that this is their faults by any means, but imagine if they could have just investigated the screams a little further, like the direction they were coming from or stepping outside for just a moment. Maybe they would have realized which cabin they were coming from and they could have seen something, or better yet, maybe stop it in its tracks. But on the other hand, you may have just had two more victims on your hands. I wish for Sue and the boys that a call had been made to the police, but I completely understand why they didn't. How many times in our lives are we like, did I just hear what I think I just did? And then we brush it off. Although I guess if both of them heard it, maybe I wouldn't have felt so crazy. Bummer for the missed opportunity there. The first person of interest that naturally came to the minds of the authorities was Sue's ex-husband. Not only was he proven to be a violent man, but it was said that Tina was sort of seemingly his favorite child. Was that because he loved her so much, or because he was abusing her and her sister? Who knows? But when they found Jim and the authorities where he lived surveilled him to see if they could find any evidence that he could have Tina, they didn't find anything pointing to Tina being there with Jim, so they brought him in for questioning instead. Jim would turn out to have an alibi during the time of the murders, plus he was absolutely nowhere near Keddie at the time. He was quickly ruled out. At the time, the authorities were working off anything that they could come up with as a possibility of motive against the seemingly innocent family. Was there a possibility that Sue was involved in drug trafficking or maybe even sex work? Things that could put herself or her family more at risk of being surrounded by criminals or people who would possibly be capable of doing such ghastly things to people. Sheila would state that if her mom had been involved in something like sex work, her thought was that her family, or at least some of them, would have seen their mom with different men, and Sue didn't really seem the type, and there were no strange men coming or going. After seemingly a toxicology report came back, the authorities didn't find any drugs in Sue's system, so that kind of rules out their theories on a more quote-unquote riskier lifestyle. They then continued to turn their focus on little Tina. If she was the goal of the whole thing by chance, then who could they look at? Well, it turns out there was someone that they could set their sights to, her teacher, a Mr. Joel Lipsey. It was noticed by more than one person that Mr. Lipsey had taken more interest in Tina than other students that he had taught. In fact, some would say that he seemed fixated on her. The authorities would say that not only did Mr. Lipsey have a picture of Tina on his fucking desk, but they also weirdly found one at his home. Now, I sat with this thought for a moment, wondering okay, was it just laying there on his desk randomly? Was it a part of something? And for the one at his home, the only thing I could think of that didn't point to him being a pedophile was if she had gotten her school pictures and gave her teacher one. I don't think that kids do this now, but I vaguely remember doing this with other kids as a child. We would get our pictures and we would give one to our teachers sometimes when we were younger. Not that they really even wanted one, but I kind of remember some of us doing that. However, if that had been the case, then why wouldn't you have just kept them in your desk or office or whatever? And why in the hell would you have two? Definitely weird, and I couldn't come up with a good enough reason to point to a misunderstanding, especially with people saying that he was fixated on her. So when they questioned Mr. Lipsey about the night of the murders, it would turn out that he was at the Keddie bar, which, if you remember, was not far from the cabins. However, his alibi checked out that he was at the bar all night, and there was no evidence of him being involved in the murders and abduction of Tina. Mr. Lipsey would eventually move from the Keddie area, and it turns out that he would go on to be arrested for the molestation of a young girl in the new area he lived, which is just so fucking detestable and so creepy that this sick fuck was a teacher and truly did probably show an interest in Tina beyond the professional student teacher or even the innocent, truly caring about your students one. Gross. Then the authorities had to wonder maybe Tina wasn't the real target. She could have been some sort of decoy to throw off the authorities and shift their focus on the kidnapping rather than solving the homicides quickly. With the first few questions about possible suspects, the authorities decided to try and find out if any of the sleeping boys in the home had possibly heard or seen anything. When asked, Ricky, who was 10 at the time, and Greg, who was 5, both told the authorities that they had slept through anything and everything that happened that night, and they had no idea what went on, which was surprising to me. It's one thing for someone to come in and they just quietly strangle just one person or even shoot more than one with a silencer or something, but it's a whole nother story with brutality. 3 people were brutally killed, and not just killed, but beaten, bludgeoned, and stabbed to death, which I can only imagine the pain and suffering that comes with that type of death, and it breaks my heart for the 2 teenage boys to go through that, and the mother to possibly have to witness her own son and his friend being tortured like that. The third boy that was asleep in the room that evening was, if you remember, Justin Easton, whose mother and stepfather lived across the street, Marilyn and Marty Smart. Now, Justin would tell a different story than the other 2. He, in fact, had some strange information that could maybe help the authorities. Justin would say that he had actually had a dream that night, and weirdly enough, the quote-unquote dream would almost be the exact match of the murders themselves. Now, according to an ABC 10 News article by Maddie Wade that was made in 2021, where she talks about the 40th anniversary of the case, she states that Justin had given conflicting statements about that night, at one time saying he had actually witnessed the murders, and another saying that he had a dream about the murders. More on this later. As Justin had presented this as a dream, the sheriff decided to hypnotize Justin in order to find out what could be buried in his subconscious. Justin would say that his dream was that they were on the Love Boat. I guess it was on TV, right before the boys went to bed. And while they were on a boat, 2 men stabbed Sue, Johnny, and Dana, and then threw them overboard, while the younger boys were able to get away in a rubber raft. With this, Justin was able to actually describe what the 2 assailants looked like in his dream. Authorities were able to clearly see the similarity of Justin's dream recollection to the reality of the murders. They were in beliefs that he had definitely seen something that night and wondered what was really going on. After the composite sketches of the 2 alleged murderers came out, they sort of pointed to 2 men, as far as looks were concerned at least. One looked almost identical to Justin's stepdad, Marty Smart, and the other looked awfully similar to Marty's friend who had been staying with them, John Boubidet, whose nickname was Beau. Marty Smart was said to be a Vietnam War veteran who had signs and possibly a diagnosis of PTSD. He was also said to be violent, aggressive, and was known to have an explosive temper. Both Justin and Marilyn would claim that Marty was abusive towards them both, and People magazine reported that there was an incident where Marty actually tried to hit and run over with his car both Justin and his mother. At one point, Marty would go to the VA, and for whatever reason, whether he asked for the help or something stood out, I'm not really sure, but Marty would end up being admitted to some sort of mental health facility. While Marty was there, he would meet someone named John Bobadek, who may have been even worse than Marty himself. When Marty got out of the facility and headed back to Keddie, he brought Beau with him, who at the time was sleeping on the Smarts' family couch. Beau was said to have been a career criminal and had a long history of criminal activities that would include being a thief, an alleged hitman, and was in and out of prison most of his life. Now here is where the story really gets fucked up. After Justin had given his account of the supposed dreams about the murders, the police kind of wondered if he had actually seen the murders, but could Marty have threatened Justin, telling him not to say a damn thing? Maybe. Not long after the triple murders, Marilyn, Justin's mother, was interviewed by the DOJ, where Marilyn had something interesting to share. First off, she would tell the authorities that Beau had actually asked Sue out, but that Sue had rejected his offer. And secondly, she would say that at some point, I'm not sure if this was the same night of the murders or before, Marilyn was at the bar with Beau and Marty when she said she overheard something terrible. She would state to the authorities that she overheard Beau telling Marty that he felt like killing someone. Yeah, is that why everyone was slaughtered? Because Sue had actually rejected some douchebag who couldn't handle a blow to his ego? Maybe. This is when Marty and Beau would be brought in for questioning. Before we begin down this path, there are some things to throw out there beforehand. This case is still to this day unsolved, as crazy as that seems. Next, there is a huge concern of a cover-up when it comes to this case that hasn't been proven, but the evidence truly shows that there was something going on. And finally, there is, without a doubt, a huge consensus that this case was grossly mishandled, under-investigated, and completely botched from the get-go. Keep that in mind as we move forward. So, Bo and Marty are brought in for questioning, and a man named Greg Hagwood, who is now, or at least when the People magazine episode came out, sheriff of the Plumas County Sheriff's Department, but at the time I believe he was probably like a deputy or something, and he would say that with the nature of the crime, they didn't really have a lot of experience in like this type of homicide, but they weren't totally incompetent. During the interviewing of Bo and Marty, Hagwood would say that the department would use 2 DOJ officers to conduct the interview who had been experts of the organized crime unit, but they had these 2 interview Marty and Bo. This, instead of what Hagwood says would have been 2 completely competent investigators to question the potential suspects. Right off the bat, there was a problem with why these 2 organized crime unit investigators were doing the questioning, and not only that, but they seemed to fuck up pretty quickly when they made the decision to interview both Marty and Bo together. Yeah, together, like in the same room. Who the fuck does that? Now, I'm no law enforcement officer, and I have never claimed to be. I don't know shit about shit, but I'm pretty fucking sure that if you have 2 potential suspects who have been basically identified by a damn witness to the unspeakable murders of 2 teenage boys and a woman, and the abduction of a 12-year-old girl that's still missing, that you probably shouldn't interview the fucking suspects together in the same room. No? How the hell are you supposed to extract any type of actual information from these 2 if they can sit there together and share their stories or alibis or whatever the fuck at the same time? I could not believe this when I heard it. Like, what in the actual fuck? There is just such a missed opportunity to play one potential suspect against the other and offer a deal to whoever talks first. Like, what were they thinking? Okay, let's get past that, or I'm going to keep going with the fucking incompetence featured there. Bo would right off the bat lie to the authorities, saying that he used to be a police officer, stating he was actually shot during an armed robbery, and took it further to say that because of this, he was now impotent. Bo tried to use this made-up story as a reason that he would have never asked Sue out in the first place on a date because he would have no interest in her due to his lack of ability to perform and impotence. So I had to look something up when it came to this part, because when I heard this was his quote-unquote reason for never having asked Sue out, not only was it likely a lie, because Marilyn either had seen or had heard from Sue about it, so whatever, but besides that, I immediately wondered if someone with impotence or erectile dysfunction can still get, turned on. My thought was that it's probably different than, castration, right? Where the person has no desire or, no libido. I would imagine that someone with ED still gets turned on and still has the desire, so I looked it up, and I was right, they do. In fact, I read on ucsfhealth.org that even with ED, people can achieve an orgasm with, different ways of having sex than just regular sex if the person cannot keep or achieve an actual erection. So, basically, Bo was full of shit in more ways than one. Also, I have to point out that my search history, because I'm a damn curious person, during the time that I have been producing this podcast is probably on someone's list to look out for. I swear, with searches of murders, types of murders, how people get away with things like murder, evidence, crime scenes, cannibalism, different pieces of human trauma, sexual abuse psychology, and top it off with if someone with ED can still orgasm, I can only imagine the type of crazy-ass operation my search history would point to if it weren't true crime. Moving on. So Bo gave his piss-poor excuse for never having asked Sue out, trying to eliminate that motive. Now, while Marty was flapping his gums, he would say something quite stupid. He would say something to the tune of the fact that Justin couldn't have been there, meaning the crime scene, without him noticing. Yeah, he fucking said that in a slip-up. That if Justin had been there, he would have noticed. What the fuck? Arrest his ass. Then Marty goes on further to say that he had quote-unquote heard that hammers had been used in the murders, and then further implicates himself by saying there's actually a hammer missing from his own home. Yeah, and then he fucking describes it in super specificity. How dumb do you have to be? For real. Now, the one he describes hasn't been found at the crime scene, but remember, they knew that there were 2 different types of hammers used because of, I'm guessing, the marks that were left or whatever. And now Marty just potentially described a hammer that maybe could have left the other marks on the body. Now, here's the fucking kicker. The police not only let those 2 turds walk right out of the sheriff's department, but they never, and I mean never, followed up with them again. Like, at all. And also, they didn't investigate Marty's missing hammer. Why? Here is where all of the speculation comes in that this case was a cover-up and botched from the beginning. Not long after the murders and being questioned, both Marty and Bo leave and move to Nevada. Suspicious much? This wasn't looked at as fleeing. Even in the sheriff's department, there were questions of exactly what the hell was going on here. There were rumors flying everywhere, and speculation as well. A few things of note about the speculation were, for one thing, Marty's good friend was the sheriff at the time, and there was a ton of talk about corruption in that particular sheriff's department. There were also thoughts that it was possible that Bo could have been an informant, due to the fact that he was for sure connected to organized crime, and many wondered if that's why so many things were pushed under the rug. It was also speculated upon that if Bo was an informant, that he could be part of a larger operation to catch a quote-unquote big fish in the mob world. That's so fucked up if that's true, and also, even if that were true, okay, Bo could be an informant, but what about Marty? It was said that it was sort of known that Marty did not like Johnny, Sue's 15-year-old son, at all. Couldn't that, coupled with the missing hammer and the slip of the tongues, add up to enough to at least get a second fucking interview? They just left town. Some of the speculation was surrounding the thought of possibly someone could have pressured the boys not to tell what they actually had witnessed the night of the murder, or at the very least, Justin. But I also had the thought there that if none of that were true, let's say, it could be possible, I guess, that 2 men who had committed these monstrous acts told the 3 of them, the people that were being attacked, that if they didn't keep quiet, they were going to go in there and kill the 2 little boys, if Marty truly didn't know that Justin was there, as he admitted. This could be a reason that the other children didn't wake up, but who knows. There was also rumors that maybe Bo was part of a witness protection program, but again, so fucking what if he was? That's an excuse for murdering 3 people and abducting a 12-year-old girl? What the hell? One of the sheriff's department's deputies that was also interviewed on the People magazine episode was Special Investigator Mike Gamberg, was saying how shocking the crime scene was and how much it scared the small town of Keddie, to the point where his own children were making sure that Mike was locking the doors and double-checking it. Up until then, people didn't even lock their doors. It was so seemingly safe. It's hard for me to imagine a time where people didn't lock their doors. Mine is constantly locked, day and night, and I have security up the ass. I am not taking any chances, but thinking about sleeping night after night, just raw dogging it, oh, that gives me the willies. Could never be me. Mike would later come out and say that he was told to stop investigating this case or he would be fired. I have never heard that in my life. A case that was unsolved and a man with the tenacity to continue to try and solve it being told to stop or they would be fired. So as far as Marty went in the article in Plumas News, they would go on to say that Marty not only was a violent man, but he was seemingly a fanatical and irrational one as well. There was reportedly an incident where Marty had gotten into an argument with his own father, and immediately after went to the store and started buying shit to make an actual bomb because he wanted to blow up his own father's house. Another incident was the trying to run over his wife and stepson, and on top of this, it was a known fact that Marty was kind of fanatical when it came to people and their morals, as he spent a lot of time reading the Bible. Boy, you gotta fucking love hypocrisy at its finest. A man concerned with everyone else's morals, and then hides behind his own religion to probably conjure up excuses and reasonings for the things that he does. The authorities never searched for Marty's missing hammer and never seemed to search for the missing hammer from the crime scene either. The case would then turn cold. Nothing had happened on the case for years until one day, exactly 3 years from the grisly murders, to the day something came to light. A man had been out collecting bottles and cans in the hills of Butte County when he would quite literally step on a human skull. At the time, the man, maybe even others, had assumed that this would turn out to be an indigenous person's remains. However, something else strange happened. They would receive an anonymous tip phone call claiming that the skull that had been found could have been that of little Tina Sharp's. Turns out the anonymous tipster was right. These were the remains of Tina Sharp, finally found 3 years after the murders. This reopened the case slightly, in the sense of now the authorities wondered, was Tina abducted and then killed that evening? Was she held somewhere and killed later? How did the caller know about the remains being Tina's? The unfortunate problem with the remains being found in this condition was that it had been too long, and with just bones, it's near impossible to tell the cause of death or even the timing. When a pastor would be the one to break the news to Sheila that they had found her sister Tina, Sheila misunderstood and thought it meant that they had found her alive, which is just so sad. He had to try to explain to her that no, they had not found her alive, but rather deceased. The authorities truly believed that this call was not a coincidence in the case, and they also thought that maybe the man who found Tina's remains could have been involved, seeing as it was 3 years to the day that she was found. That would have been one hell of a coincidence. Unfortunately, the audio tapes for the recorded tip that was given would mysteriously go missing and not investigated. This would have been a good lead for the case, but instead, nothing was done again. Bo would end up dying in 1998, and Marty would end up dying in 2000. Yeah, so now the answers will have died with them, but the case is not quite dead. In 2010, the deputy that worked at the sheriff's office during the investigation, Greg Hagwood, became the sheriff. And he wasn't going to stand for this type of shoddy work that was done on the case. He asked detectives to give it a new look, starting with the entire case file and all of the thousands of papers and evidence inside. They read through everything, and some of the quote-unquote missing evidence was found. The cassette tape was discovered, which was then sent off to the FBI for voice analysis. There was also 2 more pieces of evidence that had never come to light. One was something to the tune of Marty seeing a therapist at the VA during the times of the murders, and when Mike, the detective, reached out to the therapist, they were able to take a videotape recording of the therapist stating that Marty had indeed confessed to her that he had committed these murders. The next interesting tidbit of evidence was a letter that had been written from Marty to Marilyn that was postmarked just 16 days after the murders. Remember how Marty had taken off right after the murders? Yeah, he got the hell out of there immediately. Anyways, he sent Marilyn a letter wanting to repair his marriage, and in the letter, there was a part that said, quote, "I've given it to you. I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me that we're through. Great. What else do you want?" End quote. Oh my God, right? What the fuck? Why was that just sitting in the evidence room? Why was this never followed up on? What does he mean, boughten her love? I mean, if this letter was in there, then either Marilyn gave it to them or they found it during some sort of search, right? Was she questioned about it? I have so many fucking unanswered questions. The letter was immediately sent to the DOJ, where they were able to take a sample of the DNA from it, and it matched Marty, of course. The sheriff would say that it's compelling evidence, but it's not exactly proof, which I can understand, but it seems like a lot of this stuff is compelling, and maybe if it was all gathered together in the first fucking place, this could have been solved. Not that it's Sheriff Hagwood's fault. He is one of the good guys who actually is trying to investigate the case. The next thing that would happen in the case was that in 2016, a man out using a metal detector around the lake in Keddie would come across a hammer. Yep, a fucking hammer. The guy picks it up, sees that it's old and useless, and throws the damn hammer into the lake. First off, who fucking throws shit into a lake anymore? Dude, what the fuck? Also, this would actually end up turning out to be a good thing because, in this case, he ended up seeing a website that is built about this case from a man named DMAC called K28.com, and that is when he would immediately call the police about the hammer, and they would end up retrieving it out of the lake and sending it off for testing. Unfortunately, the hammer was so rusted that no DNA could be extracted. The authorities would see that the hammer is very similar to the hammer that Marty described, down to the damn color of the handle. After the remains of Tina were found, someone, although I am unsure who, put together a gravestone including all of the victims' names from Cabin 28 on it, and they would hold a wonderful service for Tina. Where the case stands now, according to an article written in January of 2026, so this year, the writer, Leah Silverman, would say that new DNA evidence points to investigators that some other suspects who may have aided in the crime are actually still alive. I believe that the article is alluding to the fact that in 2018, DNA evidence was found from a piece of tape at the crime scene that actually matched someone who is still living, meaning it can't be Marty or Bo. Yeah, what the fuck? Sheriff Hagwood would state in the same All That's Interesting article that his own belief is that more than 2 people were actually involved in this whole case, from the abduction of Tina to the disposal of evidence. They are all convinced that there was actually a handful of people who were involved that are still actually alive today. So I'm going to leave you guys with a few more theories that have been put out there about this case. There's a lot of information about how Sue had been allegedly counseling Marilyn about leaving her husband because Marty was so abusive. And when Marty found out about this, allegedly, that is the reason that he decided to get rid of Sue. He had actually, allegedly, reported to his therapist that he had been the one who killed Sue and Tina, but that he had nothing to do with the boys' murders. When this was brought up to the DOJ, that he had told his therapist this, in 2018, they dismissed the information as hearsay. Which is weird to me because it's from a therapist. Don't they get a little more credibility? Maybe not. I have no idea. Okay, so next, the theory that has come about, and some actually believe this is true, was that there was some sort of messy love triangle between Sue, Marty, and Marilyn. That Sue and Marty were having an affair, and when Sue was counseling Marilyn to leave Marty, Marty decided to take out Sue. Now, the only reason that this would make sense to me, which I haven't heard any evidence of the sort, and Sue didn't exactly seem the type of person who might do that to a friend, especially because her ex was abusive, and she probably knew a little bit about that, and maybe that's why she was trying to help Marilyn, but who knows, because affairs are usually secret, right? The only thing pointing to that is that handwritten letter in the evidence found, because I kept wondering why Marty said he had bought her love with the lives of 4 people. Why would he say that? It doesn't make any sense to me why Marilyn would have told him to kill them or had anything to do with it until I read that, and it was widely accepted that there was an affair. So it was said that Marilyn had basically ended things with Marty on the day of the murder. So maybe she found out about the affair, Marty planned to kill Sue to get her out of the picture and show Marilyn that he chooses her, and then maybe she ended it after the fact. Or maybe right before the murders, and that's why they were carried out. That could also be why he said he bought her love. Then she said they were done, and he asked what else she wanted. Then there is the involvement of the sheriff at the time that had been friends with Marty, Doug Thomas. When Marilyn would come out in a documentary in 2008, I guess saying that she always believed that Marty and Bo had something to do with the slayings in the cabin, Thomas would say in a contradicting statement that Marty had actually passed a polygraph about the case. But let's keep in mind they were friends, and I didn't know any evidence of a polygraph. So there is speculation that Thomas may have helped cover things up and told Marty and Bo to get the hell out of there, and they did. There is also thought that since Marty was allegedly a known drug seller, I don't know what kinds of drugs though, and if Bo is in some sort of organized crime ring, maybe Marty and Bo were both a part of something much larger, like drug smuggling. And in one source, they state that it could have even involved the government, which would be why things were pushed under the rug, under-investigated, and quote-unquote lost. This could also point to the reason that the DOJ used 2 organized crime experts to question both Bo and Marty when it came to the murders, and maybe even why they were questioned together. All of these things could point to reasons why this case was botched and seemingly covered up. But was there something larger at play, and will it ever be discovered? And that, my friends, is the shocking, appalling, and grim case of the murders in Keddie Cabin number 28. What a fucking frustrating case, right? This whole thing reeks of cover-up and mishandling and loss of life for no damn reason, for 3 poor kids and a mother. Absolutely heartbreaking and horrifying. Poor Sheila, Rick, and Greg having to grow up without their mother and their siblings and experiencing this at such young ages. I still have so many questions. Like, was there a rape kit done on Sue? I mean, I know this was before DNA, but they used to be able to swab and tell if there was semen. Did they do that for Sue since she was found half naked from the waist down? Were there any samples of blood taken from the crime scene? Often, when killers stab people, they usually end up accidentally cutting themselves. And if there had been blood samples taken back then, they could have checked like the blood grouping, or sometimes they hang on to the blood for decades and test it later. Was Marilyn interviewed about what Marty and Bo looked like over the next few days? Cuts and scrapes or bruises? When did they show back up at home? Were they covered in blood or mud or anything? Why was Tina taken to Butte County and not killed right there? And what was the purpose in taking Tina? The sheriff, now Hagwood, and Special Investigator Mike think that there are at least 2 people still alive that were probably accessories after the fact, and what is being done about their suspicions? Everyone is getting older from this case, and people are going to start dying, and then it's never going to be solved. The cabin was also demolished, which is probably a good thing. I read after the murders that no one wanted to visit the Keddie cabins, of course, so they went under, and it was sold and then abandoned. And homeless people and squatters went there, as well as young kids to drink underage, and of course, people had all sorts of spooky ghost stories. I don't personally believe in that shit, but I can imagine that it would be freaky to be out there since the case had never been solved. I hope that one day there will be clearer answers to this case and that the people who were involved are held accountable. I still can't get over the fact that Marty and Bo just took off, and I never saw anything about them again. Like, did they live normal lives? I mean, they were both criminals, but what the fuck? No one ever followed up on anything. Not even a media interview? Or maybe no one could find them. I don't know. It was hard to find information about this case because everything seems to say the same thing over and over about how the murders happened, because it was so gruesome that this is what most of the articles alluded to, probably for shock value. Anyways, if anyone has information on the case, they are urged to call the Plumas County Sheriff's Office at 530-283-6360. Let's hope it's officially solved one day. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this harrowing case as much as I did, and remember to lock your doors and windows each and every night. Come on back next Monday where we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.